before we went to the break, we played a clip that was stunning of Dr. Alward, a Canadian with the World Health Organization, I would say shilling for China.
Will the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Right, because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
We are seeing more and more evidence of the fact that a lot of people, especially at the WHO, but in other parts of the world, have been trying to advance the Chinese propaganda about how they've handled coronavirus, where it started, so on and so forth. And this actually is, and we've talked about this several times on this program already, but this actually is a very important point to keep in mind. Trump administration yesterday talked a little bit about China and coronavirus. We've got some video we will play and some points of conversation to have with our last but not least guest today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, Gordon G. Chang. He's already a good friend of the show. He's the author most recently of Losing South Korea, and earlier in this century he wrote the book The Coming Collapse of China. You see him a lot on Fox News and other outlets. He's written for numerous publications. Noted China critic Gordon Chang joins us once again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Gordon, my friend, welcome back. It's good to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Appreciate you joining us as always. So first, since I teed it up with the WHO video, you've seen it. I know you've been talking about it. Tell us what you're noticing from the World Health Organization vis-a-vis China right now. What did you make of that exchange? Especially when he says at the end of the clip, China, all of China, and ignores Taiwan, doesn't even want to answer the question from the Hong Kong reporter.
Yeah, the World Health Organization seems to be bought by China, and it's acting like an arm of the Communist Party. And clearly with regard to Taiwan, Dr. Alward, that Saturday interview with RTHK in Hong Kong really just showed you that they're much more interested in promoting China's territorial aggression than they are in promoting world health. Because Taiwan, out of all the countries in the world, Jimmy, Taiwan has had the best response to the coronavirus epidemic, even though it just sits on China's doorstep. But even more important, WHO has done some things which have actually spread this around the world. So, for instance, on January 14th, there was that infamous tweet from the WHO saying that they didn't see any evidence of human-to-human transmission. They were talking about China. Chinese doctors from about the second week of December knew that there was human-to-human transmission. Beijing didn't admit it until January 20, when they had a virologist on state TV, and the first official acknowledgement was on the following day, on the 21st. Jimmy, that lulled a lot of governments into not taking the precautions that they needed. So WHO has a lot of responsibility on its hands.
Let's pull up that tweet. In fact, Ari Fleischer, the former press secretary to President George W. Bush yesterday, put out this tweet saying, "Dear WHO, do you plan to delete this tweet? Signed, everyone in the world outside of China." And that is the now infamous January 14th tweet where WHO specifically said, quote, "Preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China." This is the World Health Organization, Gordon Chang. What credibility do they have at this point as a World Health Organization if they're not warning the world in any way, shape, or form?
I think they have no credibility. And it's not just that tweet. It's, for instance, Dr. Tedros, the Director General of WHO, in January said to Chinese state media that China's response to the coronavirus epidemic showed the superiority of China's socialist system. So this was an endorsement of totalitarianism and an attack on democracy. I don't know what that has to do with world health, though it has a lot to do with despotism. The WHO delayed the declaration of a public emergency of international concern that occurred in January, and they delayed the declaration of a pandemic in last month. So they have actually inhibited the world's response to this. And what we see right now, which is a pandemic, which is all of these hundreds of thousands of infections, and we're going to on tens of thousands of deaths, that is, I think, directly traceable to China and the WHO.
Why? Why do you think the World Health Organization is literally shilling for China in this way and concealing information from the rest of the world that would have been life-saving? Not could have been, would have been.
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you. Tedros is known to have been very much in the socialist mode. But, you know, China doesn't actually contribute that much from a financial point of view to the WHO. We contribute a lot more. But China has, over a course of decades, tried to penetrate multilateral institutions, and it's been the most successful at the WHO. So that, I suppose, who knows what China has on the senior leadership, but we need to clear out all of the senior leadership, or we need to defund the WHO, because this is not a health organization right now. This is a promote socialism, promote disease organization.
Gordon Chang, our guest, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Let's play cut one here. This is yesterday at the press briefing for the administration. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien asked about China's numbers and the accuracy of those numbers as far as what they're presenting to the world is in infection rates.
Ambassador O'Brien, did China underreport both the number of cases and the death toll from the coronavirus? And if that's the case, Mr. President, what does that mean for our relationship with China and your relationship with President Xi?
Well, number one, I think the president has a great relationship with President Xi, and we'd like to have a great relationship with China. Unfortunately, we're just not in a position to confirm any of the numbers that are coming out of China. There's no way to confirm any of those numbers. There's lots of public reporting on whether the numbers are too low. You've got access to those reports that are coming out of Chinese social media and some of the few reporters that are left in China. We just have no way to confirm any of those numbers. Thank you.
We really don't know. How do we know whether they underreported or reported however they report? But we had a great call the other night. We're working together on a lot of different things, including trade. They're buying a lot. They're spending a lot of money. They're giving it to our farmers. They're paying our farmers for the product. So, you know, we're gonna continue that along, John. Yeah.
So both of them say there's no way to confirm those numbers one way or the other, Gordon Chang, but also President Trump gets up there and is touting some of the trade exchanges, particularly with farmers, as I think, an extension of his phase one trade deal with China. What did you make of that? Because clearly there wasn't an attitude really of condemnation like we have heard from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, for example, or the vice president who was standing there.
Well, President Trump is just trying, I think, to get through a very difficult period. And so I can sort of understand that. I would have been much tougher, more realistic about China, because China maliciously spread this disease, as we've just talked about. And we're not going to be able to solve this or other problems as long as the Communist Party rules. So we've got, as Americans, I think that we have to understand that we have a common enemy. China is attacking our society across the board, and we got to deter China. And it's not just what we've been talking about. We have seen over the last 3-4 weeks a pickup in tempo of the People's Liberation Army activities and provocations around Taiwan and the southern islands of Japan. So we've got to be concerned that Beijing has got something awful in store for us. So we have just got to be vigilant on all fronts.
What we're also seeing, Gordon Chang, and this story caught my attention. It was what precipitated my invitation for you to come back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're also noticing that China is providing a lot of aid to a variety of different countries around the globe, Italy, among others. Does that concern you at all, especially in light of the fact that they concealed the information from the public with aided and abetted by the WHO, for example, about what the coronavirus would actually do and how it was a concern and it had human-to-human transmission and so forth? Are you concerned about this? Is there any way that the United States should respond to it? I mean, there are people around the globe, Italy especially is one hot-button place, that really need this kind of aid.
Yeah, I mean, China says that it's donating aid to countries like Italy, but it's really actually selling this stuff. And yeah, I'm deeply concerned about China's propaganda initiatives because they've said very clearly what they're trying to do. They think that the United States is not a good steward of the international system. They believe that they should rule. They've engaged in disinformation campaigns, which are inflammatory and dangerous. So there's nothing here to like, and there's a lot to be concerned about that China might actually be effective. Because there are large parts of the world that are anti-American, even in the best of times, and also because China is willing to spend a lot of money on some countries, corrupt its leaders, do all sorts of things. We've got a concern that leaderships in some of these countries are going to actually respond positively to China's propaganda. You know, we just got to understand our society's under attack, Jimmy. And as much as we don't want to do that, to understand that, China's not leaving us any choice.
Oh, it's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, it was 2 Thursdays ago, we first had you here on this program, Gordon Chang. And I was struck afterwards. I titled the video, China's Coronavirus Culpability. And of course, you were in there. And within moments after that video live stream went off the air after we finished up our Facebook Live, it was blocked by an apparent Chinese proxy, which happened 2 subsequent times. It's discontinued now, and they've accepted my disputes. But I don't think that was a coincidence. And what I've noticed here is that the Chinese are doing a couple of things. One, in their own country and around the globe, Iran was a proxy a couple weeks ago doing exactly this. They are trying to spread this disinformation that the United States was the incubator of this virus, created it, introduced patient zero through the U.S. Army into Wuhan, China, where really this whole thing began. And at the same time, they're also, it seems, trying to suppress those voices that are highlighting in the United States and other countries in the West what China has been up to in regards to coronavirus and the facts of that matter. What do you make of this disinformation campaign and why it is important to call out China?
Well, it's important to call out China for a lot of reasons, but the one which I think is core is that China's leaders are justifying in their own mind retaliation against the United States. And they're sort of preparing the Chinese people for that. Because in that March 12th tweet from Zhao Lijian, a foreign ministry spokesman, this was actually official. He intimated germ warfare. He didn't say it, but that was the suggestion that I got when I read it. So we've got to be concerned that what China is going to do. We Americans are often taken by surprise from our adversaries. We don't recognize the maliciousness of their campaigns against us. We don't pay attention to what they're saying. And that we ignore that for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that we live in a legitimate political system. So we don't believe that propaganda is important. But in insecure systems like China's, propaganda is absolutely vital. So we don't understand that when China declares us to be its enemy, which it did last May, that has consequences and that they are going to fundamentally attack our society. We're just oblivious. And we know what happens when we remain oblivious. China, in this last few months with the coronavirus, has taken steps that its leaders knew or should have known would lead to the spread of this disease to the United States and other places, which means that those 5,000 or so Americans who have died, they were killed. They were killed by China. I know that's tough. I know it sounds harsh, but when you look at the actions of Xi Jinping, they were more than just reckless. They were malicious to a degree where you have to come to the conclusion that they wanted those Americans dead.
Gordon Chang, before we let you go, just a couple minutes left with you. I want to ask you about North Korea. We haven't seen much news out of North Korea in a while, at least not making notable headlines and what have you. The last time I saw something was in the last week or so when President Trump offered aid to North Korea, which they didn't seem to take him up on, dealing with coronavirus. But you wrote a couple of books that relate to the North Korean crisis. I mentioned Losing South Korea, but also Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Where do you see the North Korea policy right now of the United States? Have we seen improvements on the part of the Trump administration in dealing with that country so far, particularly since the original summit, the first time that they met just a couple years ago?
Yeah, North Korea is completely on the back burner right now. You can imagine that because we've got an emergency. Our economy is at a standstill. Our society is at a standstill. We're challenged by China across the board. So North Korea right now is just not, it's just not on anyone's radar scope. And North Korea right now is hobbled itself. Although it does not admit that it's had any coronavirus cases, there are indications that the disease has ravaged North Korea, as it's ravaged South Korea and it's ravaged China, its two most important land neighbors. So we're seeing, a North Korea that's probably not in a mood to threaten us in any material way. Our readiness in South Korea is declining because of coronavirus, but I think that that's also true of North Korea's readiness as well. So right now, it is just something that we're not. It's not a threat.
Sure. Very interesting. Gordon Chang. Check out his books, The Coming Collapse of China, Losing South Korea, and Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Always great to check in with you, my friend. Thanks so much for taking the time today to join us on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. I really appreciate it.
Great to have you here. We appreciate it as well. Once again, Gordon G. Chang joining us on an action-packed edition of the program. That is it.